Imagine somewhere in the Indian Ocean, a tanker vanishes. No tracking, no flag, no paperwork. For 36 hours, it's off the map. When it reappears, it's carrying a full load of Russian oil, headed for a buyer that shouldn't exist. This isn't a glitch. It's part of Russia's expanding shadow fleet. Hundreds of aging tankers operating under fake names, switching off GPS, transferring oil in the middle of the sea, and sailing under flags of convenience to dodge Western sanctions. And Russia isn't alone. Iran's been perfecting this playbook for years, disguising shipments, rerouting payments, and laundering goods through layers of shell companies. Then there's North Korea, where sanctions evasion skips ships altogether. Pyongyang has been funding itself through cybercrime, stealing billions in cryptocurrency to fund weapons programs and luxury imports. What connects them all? When the global financial system says no, these regimes look for another way. But as evasion grows more sophisticated, the US and its allies are tightening enforcement, with secondary sanctions, AI-driven oversight, and pressure on nations that find themselves in the gray space between cooperation and complicity. Today on Midweek Sitrep, we explore the hidden economy of sanctions evasion, how it works, who profits, and what the US is doing to shut it down. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Midweek Sitrep, your weekly briefing on national security law and policy. My name is Jerry Fowler, and I'm your host. Each week I break down what you need to know and what you might have missed in the world of national security and business, all in under 20 minutes, so you can stay mission focused. Before we do a deep dive on the hidden economy of sanctions evasion, let's discuss what we should be monitoring in the world of national security this week. A private signal group used by senior Trump national security officials accidentally included a journalist while discussing upcoming military strikes in Yemen, exposing sensitive U.S. operations and triggering bipartisan calls for a full investigation. The FCC has launched investigations into Chinese telecom firms suspected of bypassing U.S. national security restrictions, raising alarms about hidden backdoors and foreign access to critical U.S. communications infrastructure. North Korea has stood up a new military unit, Research Center 227, designed to deploy AI-powered cyber tools for espionage and network disruption, signaling a new era of state-sponsored digital aggression. On Monday, the news broke that DNA testing giant 23andMe filed for bankruptcy. The news has triggered urgent concerns about the fate of 15 million users' genetic data, raising red flags over privacy, bioterrorism risk, and foreign access to sensitive U.S. biometrics. In a high-level Senate briefing on Tuesday, the heads of the CIA, FBI, and national intelligence warned that threats from fentanyl trafficking, cybercrime, and foreign adversaries are growing. However, the hearing was overshadowed by discussions surrounding the Signal chat incident involving senior officials. Stay ahead by monitoring how these stories evolve. Now, let's get to the hidden economy of sanctions evasion. Let's get started with the basics. Because to understand sanctions evasion, you have to understand the system that's being evaded. Sanctions are economic restrictions imposed by governments to change behavior, by cutting off access to money, goods, and the international financial system. In the US, sanctions are primarily enforced by Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Asset Control, or OFAC. Think of OFAC as the bouncer in the global financial club. If your name, or even your business partner's name, is on the list, you're out. No entry, no deals, no exceptions. When OFAC places someone on the Specially Designated Nationals list, or SDN list, that person or entity becomes untouchable. No American company or bank can legally do business with them. And here's the kicker. Most global trade passes through the US financial system at some point, whether it's a shipping transaction, a SWIFT payment, or a dollar-based deal. So when you're on the SDN list, it's not just the US cutting you off, it's the world. So how do sanctions go from policy to pressure? The answer is enforcement. And it's more than just freezing a bank account. Here's how it actually works in practice. First, there's financial blockades. Assets under US jurisdiction, such as bank accounts, property, ships, they are frozen. Any transaction touching a sanctioned person or company gets blocked. This doesn't just cut them off, it makes everyone else think twice before getting involved. Second, there's SWIFT access and payment system isolation. Most international payments flow through SWIFT. SWIFT stands for the Society of Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. It's the secure messaging system that banks around the world use to move money. Think of it as the global financial internet. If you're cut off from SWIFT, you're cut off from international banking. So when sanctioned entities are cut off, they lose access to global finance. That's how Iran and later Russian banks got boxed out, by being digitally locked out of the system. Third, there's export controls and licensing bans. If you listen to episode 4, you should be a little familiar with export controls. Well, in this context, sanctions include bans on shipping controlled tech, parts, and goods. If a third-party distributor moves US origin semiconductors to a sanctioned entity, enforcement is waiting. Fourth, we have maritime tracking and shipping pressure. Sanctioned vessels can't access ports or get insurance. The US tracks them using satellite data, maritime analytics, and pressure from allies to stop evasive behavior like the AIS blackouts and mid-sea transfers. Fifth, we have secondary sanctions, the global pressure point. The US can sanction non-US companies that help a sanctioned party. If a logistics firm in the UAE or a Turkish bank enables a blacklisted Russian entity, they can be cut off from the US system too. That's how the US extends reach, by making access to dollars the price of compliance. So the bottom line, sanctions are only as powerful as the enforcement behind them. And enforcement today is global, digital, and moving fast. Sanctions are powerful, but they aren't foolproof. The reality is, sanctioned regimes are highly motivated, well-resourced, and often surprisingly innovative. They don't just give up when they're cut off, they adapt. So how does sanctions evasion actually work? Well, it starts with financial concealment, hiding the source or destination of money through layers of shell companies, proxy accounts, and non-dollar payments. Then there's trade deception, mislabeling cargo, swapping documents, and rerouting goods through less scrutinized jurisdictions. And finally, maritime evasion, where ships turn off GPS, conduct mid-sea transfers, or change names and flags to obscure their identity. So with this, do sanctions work? Yes, to a degree. But they require alignment from the US government, its allies, and the private sector. If even one of those pillars break, evasion networks find a way in. Let's look at how the world's biggest violators do it. First, we have Russia and their shadow fleet. A fleet of aging, uninsured tankers sail under fake names, turn off GPS, and do ship-to-ship transfers. Their goal? Keep oil flowing without alerting regulators. Then there's Iran, the veteran operator. Shell companies, Hawala networks, Dubai free zones. Iran's strategy is old school, but sophisticated, and it's worked for decades. Then there's North Korea, the digital thief. North Korea skips the tankers and heads straight to the servers. The Lazarus Group has stolen over $3 billion in crypto. In 2017, they unleashed the WannaCry ransomware attack, crippling hospitals and businesses in over 150 countries. In 2022, they stole over $600 million from the blockchain game Axie Infinity, one of the biggest crypto heists in history. They spend it on luxury goods, banned technology, and weapons parts. Then there's the gray zone, and this is where enforcement blurs. Countries that aren't adversaries but are being used as middlemen for sanctioned regimes to move money, oil, and goods. For example, in January 2024, Hennessy Shipping, a UAE-based firm, was sanctioned for violating the $60 per barrel Russian oil cap. And even Western companies get caught too. In 2023, British American Tobacco paid $600 million for helping North Korea move money and goods through a global web of front companies. These aren't just loopholes, they're lifelines. And every time one holds, the pressure meant to isolate bad actors fade. The real test isn't whether the US and allies impose sanctions, it's whether the global system can hold the line. Here's why this matters and what you need to do about it. Sanctions risk is no longer just for big players. Whether you're a manufacturer, a tech firm, or a shipping broker, if you're touching global finance or supply chains, you're in the game. Secondary sanctions are real. One deal with the wrong counterparty can cut you off from the US market overnight. You have to screen beyond the name and really dig into the ownership. You have to be aware of OFAC's 50% rule, but also screen deeper to know who's in the investor chain. It's expected and it's good practice. Make sure to take note of the red flags. If you see AIS blackouts, ship-to-ship transfers, frequent flag changes, routing through other nations known to be in that gray area, and payments routed through high-risk jurisdictions with no business justification, stop and escalate it. These are textbook signs of sanctions evasion. You should also invest in smarter screening tools. If your compliance program still relies on spreadsheets, outdated watch lists, or static vendor databases, you're taking unnecessary risk. AI-powered screening tools can help flag anomalies, map ownership structures, and monitor shifting risk exposure more effectively. And here's another good practice tip. Conduct regular audits or assessments. You want to know where your stuff comes from, who touches it, who owns your vendors, who's in the vendor supply chain, who's in the investor supply chain. Stay on top of that information, and you might want to start an internal exposure audit this quarter. Now you might be thinking, I don't work in finance. I'm not in the shipping business. Why should I care? Well, here's why. For the individual, let's talk about higher gas prices. When sanctioned oil gets smuggled through risky routes, it drives up shipping insurance, distorts global markets, and costs you more at the pump. There's also slower payments and more red tape. Have you ever had a payment flagged or delayed by your bank or Venmo? As sanctions enforcement ramps up, so does global financial scrutiny. Have you been hacked? Well, that's not random. North Korea isn't just hacking governments. They're stealing crypto and draining digital wallets to fund missile programs. And on top of all of this, products cost more. Supply chains get messier. Sanctions force companies to reroute goods and find new suppliers, which means delays, shortages, and price hikes. Sanctions evasion isn't just a geopolitical problem. It affects the price you pay, the apps you use, and the security of your money. So what's Washington doing about all of this? And what's next under President Trump? Let's break it down. Under Trump's second term, sanctions enforcement has taken on a sharper, more unilateral tone. The Treasury Department isn't waiting for broad international consensus. It's acting fast and independently, using sanctions as a blunt instrument of economic statecraft. Expect to see more U.S. pressure on third-party facilitators, especially foreign banks, shippers, and intermediaries in places like Turkey, the UAE, China, and Southeast Asia. Translation: even if you're not a U.S. company, if you help a sanctioned entity move money, you could lose access to the U.S. financial system. Just this month, President Trump imposed a 25% tariff on any country buying oil or gas from Venezuela, directly targeting China and other third-party buyers. Now, this move bypassed multilateral coordination entirely and sent a clear message. If you do business with regimes under U.S. pressure, you're going to pay for it. Under Trump, sanctions aren't just a response, they're a starting point. From oil tariffs to crypto tracking to tech export bans, economic pressure is now the first move in geopolitical conflicts. This means we're likely to see more surprise actions, fewer waivers, and a longer list of entities under scrutiny. So what's the bottom line here? Well, this isn't business as usual. Sanctions have become a fast-moving, high-impact tool of U.S. foreign policy, used not just to punish adversaries, but to shape global behavior in real time. The days of long lead times and quiet diplomacy are over. With this administration, you better stay on your toes and be prepared. Now, a single executive order can blacklist an entire sector overnight. A tariff could drop within 24 hours' notice. And while you're trying to stay on top of all of these updates, a missed ownership link in diligence could expose your business to civil or even criminal penalties. And the cost of falling behind isn't just legal. It's reputational, operational, and public. And when enforcement hits, it's rarely quiet. Well, that's it for today's Midweek Sitrep. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share, and stay engaged. And while you're at it, stop by our store and pick up some merch. Link in the description and on our social media accounts. I'm Jerry Fowler, and remember, everything is national security. See you next time. The information provided in this podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice. Listeners should consult with a qualified professional before making any decision based on the content discussed. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency, the U.S. military, or any employer, organization, or entity with which we are affiliated. Mention of a company, product, or service in this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation. Any references are for information purposes only. This podcast does not disclose any classified, proprietary, or confidential information. Discussions are based on publicly available information and personal expertise.